So, welcome to another episode of the Rediscovery Channel, where each week we tell each other a story that the other person may or may not have heard about. And I've heard this week, it's my turn, and I want to talk about something called Doggerland. Have you ever heard of it?
Doggerland. Is that part of England?
Yeah, I mean, technically it is.
Some
Yeah.
islands?
At some point, it turned into islands. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. No, I want to talk about a time where England was actually connected to Europe, mainland Europe, and was just actually it was a peninsula of Europe, and this was a time during the last Great Ice Age.
That was the time when the Sindar were living there, and they called it Luthien.
The who were living there? Sorry.
Yeah, sorry. Small joke. I'm just thinking about, that reminds me of the old lore that Tolkien had originally written about how the elves, it was originally connected to the mainland, but it got separate because the elves dug a trench in order to get away from humans.
Ah,
Yeah.
okay. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, well, I'll include some images, or actually, I'll include a lot of images on YouTube and BitChute. But Doggerland was actually a vast expanse of land connecting all the way from England to France to the Netherlands to Denmark and even Norway. And this was the time. Well, the last ice age started about 2.6 million years ago, and it lasted until about 8,000 years ago. And this part of the world was inhabited by people for about 1 million years. So first it was the Homo antecessor, and then later different species was the Neanderthals till about 50 to 40,000 years ago. And then finally it was humans that lived there. And they lived there for a long time, and it was a very different time than the time today. Most of Northern Europe was covered in thick sheets of ice. England was mostly covered in ice and was extremely harsh, a harsh kind of environment. But at the bottom of what is now the North Sea was a giant valley where the River Thames, and the Rhine and the Seine and other large rivers of Europe today would meet. And it was a very fertile area as well. And this was the hunting grounds of a Mesolithic society. And the reason we know is people have speculated that there was land here before. Even H.G. Wells referred to the concept in a story of the Stone Age in 1897, which is set in, quote, a time when one might have walked dry shod from France, as we call it now, to England, and when a broad and sluggish Thames flowed through its marshes to meet its father Rhine, flowing through a wide and level country that is under water in these latter days, and which you know by the name of the North Sea. So yeah, actually, we found this, or I should say, the previous century. There were these ships, fishing ships, Dutch fishing ships called doggers. And the way they fish is they actually drag the nets over the bottom of the sea. They're way down. And they're trying to get all kinds of bottom fish, which, by the way, are very good, especially if you put some herbs on them. But they started finding like hunting gear, knives from both Neanderthals and modern humans. They found.
Wait, that stuff was coming up in their nets?
Yes, yeah.
Where was this? The English Channel?
This was in the North Sea. So this was in the North Sea. So it was Dutch ships and later English ships as well. They started finding all these these materials like spears and different materials that showed that yes, there was a civilization here. And there was actually they also found underwater forests. So they found dead trees on the bottom of the North Sea, or the leftovers of it. So yeah, they now know that there was this civilization at the bottom of what is now the North Sea. And this is Doggerland, and so it's called after the ships. And you still have the Dogger Banks, which is like a sand bank, where it's, you know, the North Sea is more shallow. But this is how they know. So they've dug up all kinds of things, and they recently reconstructed one of the faces of the Neanderthal there, and I think his name is, they gave it a name, I think it's Krijn. I'll include a picture in the video as well. So they use some facial reconstruction mythology to show what the Neanderthal looked like. But yeah, this is what I wanted to talk about. The kinds of animals they had at the time were also very different. So the people there were mostly meat eaters, so they were hunter-gatherers. They found foot tracks there as well, hunting material, and the animals they would hunt would be mammoth, woolly rhinoceros, but they would also face predators like saber-tooth tigers or cats. So it was a very different kind of flora and fauna than the one we have today. And yeah, so at the time, you would be able to walk all the way from Dover to Calais. And I don't know, I've been there one time. You can actually see straight across what is now the English Channel. And throughout the years, the Rhine and the Thames and the Seine, I don't know how to Seine, I guess, the French river, they carved through the water and then created room, like they slowly trickled into the Atlantic, what would later become the English Channel. And people lived there for the longest time until the ice started retreating and the water started slowly rising. So the landscape was slowly changing and more turned into swamp. Until finally there was a big landslide in Norway, and there were tidal waves up to 14 meters high. And most of the Doggerland was then submerged, except for what they think was probably an island in the middle. Some people may have survived there for some time, until that was eventually also swallowed up by the sea. So yeah. It's a short story, but I just found it fascinating to think that this place where the Vikings used to cross the streets, the seas to repopulate England, that there were actually cultural ties between the countries that go way back.
I mean, this geographical, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's peoples like some of the people groups between the Netherlands, Denmark, and England. They would have traveled across Doggerland to the different areas. Although England at the time was, extremely cold and inhospitable, there were people living there already as well. So yeah, so it's a very, very different time, and I just I like the idea of like a time where you have like mammoths and woolly rhinoceros and reindeers and horses and Neanderthals.
Yeah, I've never heard of a woolly rhinoceros before. Is that a real thing?
Yeah, that's a real thing. I'll include some images as well. But yeah, that you had people living here, and it was connected through a land bridge, so to speak, similar to how the U.S. was connected through a land bridge to Asia, right? That's how the Native Americans made it over to the United States.
Yeah, some of them, but probably not all. I mean, that we could probably do another video on itself. But there are different groups of Native Americans, different haplogroups, also different physical appearances. And I mean, I don't want to get that's like kind of a separate topic, but like if you look at, coming back to Europe, if you look at the continental shelf underneath the ocean, like you'll see that if you just lower the water level a bit, all those things are connected. And if the ice age really put a lot of the ice into a solid state, then that could possibly account for the ocean level being lower. Also, there's a lot of other places in the world, like around the Black Sea and around the coast of India, and even in the Mediterranean, where they found cities built under the water. Of course, they weren't built under the water. They were built at a time when the water level was lower. They were built close to the water. And they do match with known civilizations. So it looks like, that people retreated upwards as the water levels rose. And I don't think that's, some people say that's the biblical flood, but that's not the case. That is something that, probably that would have happened afterwards. Now, there are cities under the water that don't match with any known civilization, which I'm actually gonna do a video on that eventually. But yeah, it's funny because if you look at the continental shelf, it does start to kind of look like the Middle Earth a little bit. Like
Yeah.
and I don't know if Tolkien knew that or not. I think he said he was taking liberties with his map, interpreting things. And I want to say impressionistic. I don't want to say something wrong, but he was doing what he needed to do for his story. But it does look a lot like that. The northern part, it does look kind of similar. I'm wondering if he knew that, or if he's just, because it was the early 1900s. So I don't know how good their oceanography was. They didn't have radar until World War II. But they
No,
had sonar.
and they
Sonar.
they now have maps of what Doggerland looked like, and like where probable settlements would have been. But that was all done in the 20th century. So
Yeah.
by the Dutch and UK, yeah, naval agencies. So
Probably the water. I mean, there is evidence. Yeah, I see there's some other maps coming here. It just looks yeah, it just looks like the water level is lower, so more of the continental shelf is showing, and it does look a lot more like the Middle Earth. But I'm also thinking there is evidence that the water level was lower in the past,
yeah,
and
that's
people.
that's also why did why this what is now the North Sea was completely, well, there would have been lakes and stuff, and but it was basically land where people could live. And there was an interesting plan just that came out recently by a Dutch scientist to deal with, like with the climate changing. And I'm not using that as a trigger word, but as you can see, climate change was already happening at the time, although it was happening at a very slow pace. The end result was that this whole area was flooded. But this scientist was talking about closing off, building a dam basically from Scotland all the way to Norway, and then also building one across the English Channel, and then basically turning that whole area into land, which would be interesting. Although, of course, it would mean shutting down giant ports like London and Rotterdam. So I'm not sure how that would work, and I'm not sure if Russia would be happy with that kind of move as well, because it would make it even harder for them to get into to access strategic areas. But that would be interesting, and it probably would be doable. And the cost is actually not that crazy high. The estimate was something around 250 billion to 500 billion euros. And if anybody could do it, it would probably be the Dutch government. I don't know if you've ever heard of the Afsluitdijk, but have you ever heard of it? The
I,
dike in the Netherlands, or
I know that they've reclaimed some water or some land from the sea, and there's some parts of your country that are below sea level, and there's like walls keeping the ocean back. Is that right?
That's correct. And the Afsluitdijk is one of the biggest dikes. We also have the waterworks that can close down in case there's a storm coming. And this is, I think, it's one of the world wonders. It's that was a giant investment, and it was because we had major floodings in the early last century, where many people drowned, and they can basically, when there's a storm coming, they can close off any kind of water, like the sea water coming in. But the Afsluitdijk is a permanent one. It's a dike, and it has a road over it. I've driven over it many times. It's about 20 miles long, 32 kilometers or something like that. And it turned the IJssel, what is now a lake, that was a sea before, and that would also, whenever there was a storm, there would also be flooding. People would drown. And there is another dike behind it, and they basically turned a whole part of what was the ocean into a new province, where there's lots of farm. It's basically all flat and lots of grass and cows and stuff like that. But yeah, it's definitely doable. So it could maybe be interesting to look at that, to reclaiming part of or most of the North Sea and turning it into land. So I don't know.
The only thing is that I would not want to live in that area, because if anything happens to that wall, then you're going to die. The ocean's going to come right back and flood your house.
Yeah, if there was another landslide in Norway, which apparently they happen quite often in the fjords, where they have like landslides every year in Norway, and like they would typically go into a fjord, and like parts of like a town will get like submerged. There was like one last year, I believe, and I don't think anybody died. I think maybe one or two people. Most people were warned, but like it's pretty crazy. Like entire parts of the town just slid right into the fjord. But anyway, yeah, if you have another one of those with a giant tsunami, then that would be the end. But then again, if there was a tsunami now, where I live, it would also be the end. So, yeah.
Yeah, I'm
Anyway,
much more of a fan of colonizing other planets. I think we should start with the moon and set up some colonies inside of the lava tubes. Maybe segment the lava tube with different airtight sections with multiple airlocks. Get some farmlands in there. Drill into the sides of the lava tube for to make personal dwellings. I think I'd have more faith in that than I would in living behind a wall to keep the ocean out. Like that would make me so nervous. And it's interesting that historically, the Netherlands has chosen to do that kind of stuff rather than colonize other parts of the world like the English. The English just like, we're going to take over this place. We need some more land. Let's go take this land. Nobody's using it. Oh, there's people there. Well, they're not using it properly. They didn't build anything, so we're going to go there and build something.
yeah. At some point, I want to do a topic about the Boer Wars. I don't know how much you know about that, but those were Dutch settlers
Only
over
what
in.
you've told me.
Okay, yeah. All right. So yeah, that was my story about a different time, and I just find it fascinating to think that there's these ancient forests at the bottom of the ocean and civilizations. And one other part that I found interesting is Friesland is a northern province, actually where the Afsluitdijk connects to North Holland. But there they would also dam up parts of the country throughout the ages, and then they would pump out the water using windmills. And then what would happen is if you pump out the water, because of the type of soil, it would start going down. It would start shrinking. And because of that, like it would get lower and lower. And then whenever a dam would break, like parts of the country would flood. So at one point they had a big storm, and they actually had the sea crash all the way into the province, and many people drowned and stuff like that. So yeah, it's an interesting like you're asking, like, why did the Dutch do that? It's probably because they were already doing this before they knew there was a new world or any colonies or things like that. They've been doing this for hundreds of years. But Yeah.
That's an interesting cultural development, compared with other cultures that were advanced. Like they would go to other places, like the English would go, the French would go, although not as much of an extent. Spanish would go, though not as too much of an extent, But they were like, but they both had bigger countries to begin with.
Yeah, we're kind of boxed in between Germany and France. So yeah.
Different mentality, different from the normal Germanic pattern of thinking of go and conquer and bring back the spoils of war, colonize, all that stuff.
Yeah, it's more about farming here and making money. So
Yeah,
that's
making
more.
making money.
Yeah,
That's right.
enjoying life a little bit. So yeah, man. All right.
Uh,
So but yeah, if I want to close it off. So if you have any suggestions, please let us know. If you have a like, please give it to us. We appreciate it. If you want to share this video, definitely appreciate it. Subscribe because we're coming out with new stories every week. Who knows what we'll be talking about next week. Other than that, anything to add, Ivor, from your side?
no, just to add that we have a few requests and we're getting to them. But so we do take requests. So far, we've taken every single one. But of course, there's a huge time difference between when we record the videos and when they get posted. So if you put in a request and we said yes to it, just keep watching. Eventually, it will be there.
Yeah, we'll get to it for sure. All right. Thanks, everybody. See you in the next one. Okay.
Great.